the best and worst Suns in NBA history. For some of the best, we're going to be looking at the greatest second or even third generation players that we've seen come through the NBA in general. And for the worst, we're going to be looking at some of the greatest players who have had Suns and they just didn't turn out to be any good. So for example, let's start with some of the worst with Michael Jordan's sons, Marcus and Jeffrey Jordan. Now Jeffrey's the oldest by 2 years, and he was a 6'1" point guard, while Marcus was a 6'4" shooting guard. And for a couple of years, the two played high school basketball together, which got a lot of media attention because of who they were, with 3 of their games being played on ESPN in 2007. But honestly, these guys weren't great players from the start, and I don't know what never clicked for them. You'd think that having the greatest of all time and a guy with one of the most insane work ethics as a father would in turn make them great, but to end out their high school careers, Jeffrey was the 97th ranked point guard in the country, while Marcus was the 60th ranked shooting guard the year he graduated. And to prove their lack of greatness, Jeffrey was only recruited as a preferred walk-on by 3 schools before choosing the University of Illinois, and he played there for a little bit before transferring to UCF to play with Marcus. And here's how you know just how bad they were. Marcus played pretty good for his 3 seasons and averaged 12 points a game, but decided to stop playing basketball after it wasn't headed anywhere serious. While Jeffrey only averaged 1 point a game for his 4-year career, before entering the NBA draft and obviously going undrafted. I mean, sometimes GMs will want to take a risk on a second generation player, especially if you're Michael Jordan's son, and I'm guessing that's what he was hoping for, but it definitely wasn't worth the risk for any team. And these guys didn't officially play in the NBA, but everyone else in this video has. I just had to make an exception for them because of who they were. Even though, like I said, they were some of the worst, but one of the best sons of a former NBA player, as we know, is Steph Curry, who by far exceeded expectations and had a better career than his father Del Curry could have ever dreamed of having. For all of his career, Del was a role player and a 6-man that was in fact by far one of the best shooters in the league. And that's why Steph's as good as he is. 1, because it's just in his DNA, and 2, because he's been attending NBA games and learning the form and the art of a shooter from a great NBA level shooter from as early on as he could pick up a basketball. And don't think that's the only reason Steph's as great as he is, because plenty of great shooters and NBA players have kids, but not everyone has what it takes to turn into an elite player like Steph Curry did. And while we're speaking of the Curry family, that means we gotta mention Seth. Now a couple of years ago I would have easily put him in the category as one of the worst sons of NBA players, because I mean, for him to have nearly the same childhood as Steph and a lot of the same opportunities to become a great player, it's just weird to see how differently their careers have turned out. But recently he has turned into a solid player, so he's definitely not one of the worst. Another one of the best though that had a brother in a similar situation, which we'll get to in a minute, is Klay Thompson. It's weird though with Klay. After hearing Steph's story, you would think that his father Michael Thompson was also a great NBA shooter and taught Klay all of his life. But if you didn't already know, Michael was actually a center that only shot 12 total threes for all of his career. But that actually helped Klay out just as much, because since his dad was 6'10", anytime they'd play pickup games, Klay would have to shoot jump shots to score on him. And that started from an early age. Then his middle school coach was a guy that had studied shooting forms for years, and Klay says that he taught him the perfect form back then. And I mean, if you watch him shoot, it makes sense. So it was that, on top of years of hard work, that got him to where he is today as one of the top players in the NBA. As for his brother Michael though, not so much, because he's definitely one of the worst NBA sons we've seen. He's 1 year older than Klay, but was never nearly as good of a player. He was a 2-star recruit heading into college, averaged 11 points a game at Pepperdine University, went undrafted, played for 5 years in the D-League, and only ever 5 games in the NBA for the Cavs, where he averaged 3 points a game. So he wasn't a better player than his brother or his dad. Kobe Bryant was a much better player than his father though, in Joe Bryant. Joe played 8 years in the league, then moved his family to Italy where Kobe grew up. And of course Kobe had a slight edge from his dad being a pro player, but as I mentioned with Steph, that only matters so much, and his legendary career came more from something inside of him and a mindset he was just born with. Some desire to be the best player he possibly could be. And I think it's safe to say that if he didn't have that legendary work ethic, he probably would have been a player that played at a similar level to his father. But since he did have it and he worked every single day, he really became one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And speaking of greatest players of all time, John Stockton's son David Stockton definitely isn't that. Instead, he's one of the worst sons out there. And it's weird, because as we're starting to see, a lot of NBA legends' sons don't turn out to be great, but random role players' kids historically have turned out to be a lot better. And David's one of these cases. As we know, his father is one of the greatest point guards of all time, a great shooter, a great defender, and an even better passer that has a ton of his own all-time records. But sadly, none of that transferred over to his son. An average role player in high school, came off the bench in his first 3 seasons at Gonzaga, before finally starting as a senior and averaging 7 points a game. Of course, leading to him being undrafted in 2014. And ever since then, he's bounced around the D-League, overseas, and getting 10-day contracts with a few NBA teams. And he's gotten a good amount of them. Teams keep trying to bring him in, hoping he'll show some resemblance to his father one day, but they all end up just waiving him within a month. But for Devin Booker, it's a different story, because he's by far one of the best second generation athletes that we've seen in the NBA. While his father Melvin Booker might actually be the worst father in this video, because while he was great in high school and college, he went undrafted, then played for only 2 seasons in the league, averaging 5 points a game. And Melvin was only 6'1", but Devin has grown to be 6'5", and a much better player than his father ever was. And this was the point I was getting at earlier. Back in the 90s, you would have guessed that Michael Jordan's kid would grow up to be one of the best scorers in the NBA today, or even Kareem's or one of Karl Malone's kids. Nobody would have expected Melvin Booker's son to be in that spot, and it's just weird how that works. And to further prove this point, Gary Payton II is another prime example, because as we know, his father is one of the better point guards of all time, and one of the better defenders we've ever seen. He had a great all-around game and 15 great seasons in the league. So when his son grew to be 6'3" and started playing high school and college basketball, you could only start to think that he was going to follow in his father's footsteps. But he wasn't a standout in college, so he went undrafted, and has since bounced between the G League and NBA rosters since 2016, averaging 3 points and 1 assist a game while on NBA teams. He has actually started 17 games for the Wizards this year, which is by far the most he ever has, but his game still hasn't improved at all, and will probably never lead to a real NBA level. While on the other hand, both of the top 2 picks in the 2014 NBA draft were 2 of the better second generation players in Jabari Parker and Andrew Wiggins. And both of their fathers, Mitchell Wiggins and Sonny Parker, had a short 6-year career, and they both had 1 season averaging 15 a game, so they were decent players. And while both sons are without a doubt better than their fathers, both men have also not lived up to the hype that's been around them since they were drafted. Even without that though, they're still 2 of the better sons that we've seen. Then I was going to include Patrick Ewing Jr. here because of who his dad is, and name him one of the worst second generation players to play in the NBA, but I mean, he really didn't. He played in the G League for about 7 years, while only playing 7 total games for the New Orleans Hornets, and in those he only averaged 2 minutes and 0.4 points a game, so Patrick Ewing's son deserved a mention for the video, but didn't deserve to be formally included in this list. I can include Luke Walton here though as one of the worst, because his father Bill Walton was an all-time great NBA center, a former league MVP, finals MVP, and a 2-time champion, plus much more. And while Luke is also a 2-time league champion, that's where their similarities stop, because he averaged single digits every single year of his career except one, was nothing more than a role player, and while some people may have expected him to play a little better given who his father was, he never really did. Then while Jalen Rose also had a father who was a great player, he had a very different upbringing than a guy like Luke Walton. Jalen became one of the best second generation players, and his father was a guy named Jimmy Walker, who was the first overall pick in 1967 and averaged 16 a game for his career. The only difference was that Jalen never met his father. He knew who he was, but never met him, and didn't want to since he abandoned his family when he was born. But by knowing who his dad was, he knew early on that he was going to be gifted athletically and have a real chance at professional sports. So he worked hard to get his family out of their bad situation, grew to 6'8", and not only made it to the NBA, but became a better basketball player than Jimmy Walker ever was. And after Jalen's career, he did talk to his father a couple times on the phone, but then he soon after passed away in 2007 before they could ever meet up. Another one of the best though has got to be Kevin Love. And not gonna lie, this picture of Stan Love makes me a little uncomfortable. But we're gonna get that off the screen and ignore that. And instead mention that Stan only had a 4-year NBA career, but really put Kevin on the right path to become a great player on his own. He gave him his height, along with getting him onto AAU teams all of his life. And it's interesting because Kevin grew up with Klay Thompson in the same area, who as we mentioned was also a second generation player. And from early on, Kevin was always a standout. A 5-star recruit in high school, a 5th overall pick going into the league, and has had a long list of accomplishments throughout his 12-year career. And now we don't have any more of the worst second generation players, but the 4 remaining best are Al Horford, whose dad only played 2 seasons in the league, Domantas Sabonis, whose father, as you probably know, was Arvydas Sabonis, one of the best overseas players of all time, and Sabonis at a young age is doing a great job of starting to live up to that name, while Jaren Jackson Jr. is becoming another top second generation player, already playing much better than Jaren Jackson Sr. ever did. And finally, a little random, there's Mike Bibby, who also had a much better career than Henry Bibby. But that's gonna wrap up the video. I covered mostly all of the second generation players that were really worth mentioning, but if there's anyone you felt I might have left out, comment down below and let me know. If not though, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.